Hey everyone, welcome back to another deep dive.
hmm
You know those crazy intense storms and earthquakes and floods we keep seeing more and more of?
Yeah, it seems like every time you turn on the news.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, today we're diving into how well homes built with those modular housing systems, those MHS buildings,
Right.
can hold up against these natural disasters. It's like peeking into the future of building, disaster-proof homes.
It really is. And what I find fascinating is that this document we're looking
But
at,
this MHS challenges natural disasters thing.
yes, that it goes way beyond just, what materials to use. It really gets into the WHY of what makes a building survive or, totally collapse when these disasters hit.
Yeah, and I think that's something a lot of people don't think about,
You're
right?
absolutely.
Like, it's not just about having a strong house.
Yeah.
It's understanding the forces, like the physics almost.
The physics, the forces at play. Yeah.
So before we jump into specific disasters, can we just back up and explain to people what makes MHS different from how most homes are built now?
Totally. So imagine if your house was built like a giant, super strong Lego set.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Instead of building it like piece by piece on site, MHS uses these pre-made panels that are bolted together onto this really sturdy aluminum frame. And that frame is key because it's like the skeleton that holds the whole thing together.
Okay, so it's not wood framing.
Right.
It's metal.
Right. It's metal framing.
That's a big difference.
Huge difference.
Okay, that visual really helps. So now I'm picturing this like Lego house battling an earthquake. Let's start there.
Okay, let's do it.
Because we've all seen those images on the news, right? The devastation. But I don't think most people understand how a structure actually fails in an earthquake.
Right. So it all comes down to how the structure reacts to that ground shaking. The document lays out 3 ways a building can resist an earthquake. You can have just pure strength,
Okay.
you can have flexibility, or you can use some pretty high-tech stuff to like counteract the movement.
So like a bunker versus a skyscraper versus some building with fancy shock absorbers.
Yes, exactly. You got it.
Yeah.
So MHS, with its metal frame, it's definitely more rigid than a typical wood frame house. But that doesn't mean it just crumbles. What the document points out is that those bolted connections we talked about and the inherent strength of the metal itself actually lets it flex a little bit, kind of like a skyscraper, without
Yeah.
just completely falling apart.
Well, it's like a metal version of those traditional Japanese homes that the document talks about.
Yes,
Flexible but strong.
exactly.
Okay, I like it. But the document also mentions something about metal fatigue. Should I be worried about that? If my house is basically made of metal.
So it's a valid concern. It is something to think about. But think about it this way. Metal fatigue happens over a very long time with constant stress and vibration. Like imagine driving down a really bumpy road for decades.
Well, yeah.
Decades. In a normal home's lifespan and with, regular maintenance, it's unlikely to be a big issue.
Okay, that makes me feel better.
Good.
Let's switch gears to fire now. Obviously, wood burns. But how well do these modern stick-built homes really resist fire?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting and maybe a little scary for some listeners.
Oh boy.
You'd think with all the fancy new materials, modern homes would be better at resisting fire. But actually, the document says they're becoming more like paper mache
Really?
because of all the composite materials and plastics that are used these days.
Wow, so newer doesn't necessarily mean better when it comes to fire?
Not necessarily.
No,
Okay,
that's a good thing to keep in mind.
for sure.
This is where MHS seems to have a clear advantage, though, right?
Yeah, big time. Because aluminum obviously doesn't burn. It actually acts as a fire break, stopping the flames from spreading as easily. And it's not damaged by water or all those harsh chemicals they use to put out fires.
Right. And the document even mentions how sometimes after even a small fire, the damage from the smoke and chemicals could be so bad in a traditional house that you basically have to gut the whole thing.
Yeah, it's a nightmare.
That's crazy. So with MHS, you might avoid all that completely.
Potentially, yeah.
Possible?
Wow, that could save a homeowner so much money and heartache. Absolutely. Just the potential for less damage and lower repair costs after a fire is huge.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about another big one. Floods. Everyone knows how damaging the initial water can be, but the document really highlights how it's what comes after the flood that really devastates those conventional homes.
It's true. The document kind of paints this grim picture, After the floodwaters recede, you've got mold, warping, rot setting in away. It often becomes cheaper to just demolish the house than to repair it.
It's like starting over completely
Yeah.
with MHS again. It seems to be a winner here, right?
Yeah, I mean, aluminum doesn't care about water. The panels can be replaced. And here's the kicker. I gotta ask you this. Is it actually true that you can take apart an MHS home and move it to higher ground if a flood is coming?
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Like, is that for real?
You're not kidding.
No, I'm serious. It's in here.
That's amazing. It's like having a giant life raft for your house.
Yeah, like a portable house.
Oh, love it.
Good.
Okay, I'm definitely starting to see why these systems are becoming more popular, especially in flood-prone areas.
Speaking of increasingly strong storms, let's move on to hurricanes.
Okay, so with hurricanes, it's not just the wind itself, it's all the debris that starts flying around.
Oh, yeah, that becomes like a weapon.
It's dangerous. That's why building codes are getting stricter these days. And think back to the earthquakes for a second and how some buildings are designed to sway. Hurricanes are kind of similar, except it's the wind that's causing the vibration and the stress.
So those bolted connections that help an MHS house survive an earthquake also come in handy during a hurricane.
Yeah, exactly. And the document even compares how well MHS structures with those SIPs, those structural insulated panels,
Right.
how well they resist punctures from flying debris compared to traditional homes with SIPs. And that strong aluminum frame of MHS gives it a big advantage. It makes it way less likely to just come apart at the seams.
So even though both types of homes can use SIPs, the added strength of the MHS frame is what makes a difference.
Exactly.
Okay, last but not least, we got to talk about tornadoes. I have a feeling this is where things get a little less optimistic, though.
Yeah, you're probably right. Let's be honest. Here, very few structures above ground, no matter how they're built, can really withstand a direct hit from a tornado.
Right. It's just Mother Nature at its most powerful.
Yeah. But the document says something interesting. It suggests that in tornado-prone areas, the only truly safe options might be domed homes or underground homes.
Really? That's kind of a sobering thought.
It is.
So even with all its advantages, MHS might not be a magic bullet solution for every scenario.
Right. But it does sound like it offers some advantages when it comes to rebuilding quickly after a tornado.
Yeah, because you can just basically put it back together.
Right, it's prefabricated.
Yeah.
So you essentially have a house kit ready to go.
Yeah.
And that allows for much faster reconstruction than traditional methods.
Okay. Before we wrap up this part of the deep dive, let's do a quick rundown of some other, maybe less dramatic hazards that MHS can handle.
Sure. Like, what are you thinking?
Things like termites break-ins. Those aren't exactly natural disasters,
Yeah.
but they can cause a lot of damage and stress.
Absolutely.
So does MHS offer any advantages there?
Yeah, definitely. When these things happen, it's not just about how well the house is built, it's also about how easily and cheaply you can fix it.
Right. Got to be practical.
Exactly. And this is where MHS shines because with its modular panels and replaceable components, repairs are often much simpler and cheaper than with a traditional home.
It's like swapping out a broken Lego brick instead of rebuilding a whole section.
You got it.
And speaking of swapping things out, didn't the document mention something about bullet resistance? Was I imagining that?
Nope. You weren't imagining it. While it's not like a standard feature, the document says it's actually pretty easy to integrate bullet-resistant materials into those modular wall panels.
What? So you're telling me I can have a house that can withstand a hurricane and is also bulletproof?
It's possible.
That's insane. I love it. Okay, we've gone from escaping lava flows to bulletproof walls.
Yeah.
MHS is full of surprises.
That it is.
But I'm sure it's not all sunshine and roses. There's got to be some downside stress.
Of course. No building system is perfect.
Yeah.
And MHS definitely has its limitations. Stay tuned, because in part 2, we'll dive into some of the challenges and considerations that the document reveals, so you don't want to miss that.
It's going to get even more interesting, folks, so don't go anywhere. Welcome back. We've been uncovering some pretty amazing advantages of these modular housing systems. But the document goes deeper than just those big dramatic events like hurricanes and earthquakes.
It does.
It also highlights some less obvious, but equally important advantages of MHS.
Right. Things that most people probably wouldn't even think about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For instance, let's talk about moisture damage. It's something that can slowly wreak havoc on a home. And it's especially relevant when we consider those structural insulated panels, those SIPs
Right.
that are becoming popular in both traditional and modular homes.
Yeah, SIPs are everywhere these days.
Okay, but before we go any further, can you back up for a sec and explain what SIPs are and why they even matter?
Sure. So basically, SIPs are like these supersized sandwich panels that they use for walls and roofs.
Okay, I'm picturing a giant sandwich.
Right. And they have a core of insulation sandwiched between 2 layers of the structural board. Often it's a type of engineered wood called oriented strand board, OSB.
OSB.
OSB, it's like plywood on steroids. It's super strong and you can cover large areas with it.
Okay, got it.
SIPs are great for energy efficiency. But the document points out that they can be susceptible to swelling and warping if they get wet.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
So if SIPs are being used in both traditional and MHS homes, how does the MHS design handle this moisture issue better?
That's where the aluminum frame comes in.
Okay.
In an MHS home, the SIP isn't carrying all the weight by itself. Instead, it's inset into that aluminum frame, almost like fitting a puzzle piece.
Ooh.
So the frame is doing the heavy lifting, and the SIP acts more like a protective shell.
So the aluminum takes the load, and the SIP is more like the finished surface.
Exactly.
That's pretty clever.
Yeah, it is. And even with that really tight fit, there might still be tiny gaps between the SIP and the frame.
Sure, I can see that.
And if moisture does get in, it's actually absorbed by that OSB layer within the SIP.
Okay.
And here's the cool part. This actually tightens the connection, making the whole structure even more rigid.
Wait, so the moisture is actually working for the structure instead of against it?
It is, yeah. It's kind of counterintuitive.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
And this moisture resistance probably ties into another big concern for homeowners: mold.
Absolutely.
Mold is a huge problem these days, especially with these modern homes that are built to be so airtight.
It's true. The document actually says that once a traditional wood-framed house gets really infested with mold, sometimes the only solution is to tear the whole thing down.
That's a homeowner's worst nightmare.
It is. Starting over from scratch.
So how does MHS fare in that department?
Well, it's not completely foolproof,
Yeah.
especially if the SIPs they use are OSB-based,
Right.
but the document points out a couple of big advantages.
Oh, good.
Remember those aluminum frame members we talked about?
Yeah.
They actually act like fire breaks,
Yeah.
so they prevent mold from spreading easily from one section of the wall to another.
So even if one area gets contaminated, the mold is less likely to take over the whole house.
Exactly. It's contained.
Okay, that's a big relief.
Right. And because MHS is modular, it's much easier to just replace those contaminated sections without having to demolish the whole structure.
Right, you just pop out the bad parts and put in new ones.
Yes, exactly. It's a much less invasive approach.
So it's like surgery instead of amputation.
You got it.
Okay, let's switch gears for a second to a natural disaster that I bet most people don't associate with MHS.
Volcanoes.
Volcanoes.
Yeah.
That's not something you hear every day when you're talking about building a house.
I know. It's so specific. But the document actually mentions them. And I was wondering, is this something that people really need to worry about?
Well, it's definitely a valid concern in certain areas, like,
Yeah.
Hawaii, where lava flows are an unfortunate reality.
Right, of course.
And in those situations, the document suggests the biggest advantage of MHS is portability.
Portability. Wait, are you saying you can pack up your MHS home and move it out of the path of a lava flow? You could. It might sound crazy, but remember how we talk about disassembling an MHS home to escape a flood?
Right.
Same principle applies here. Obviously, you'd need some time and resources to make it happen, but it's an option that traditional homes just don't offer.
Okay, I'm officially adding lava flow escape plan to my MHS fantasy.
There you go.
But even beyond these really dramatic headline-grabbing disasters, the document talks about how MHS handles those smaller, everyday threats that can still be major headaches for homeowners.
You're thinking things like termites and break-ins.
Exactly. Those aren't natural disasters, but they can still cause a lot of damage and stress.
Totally.
So does MHS offer any advantages there?
Absolutely. The document emphasizes that when these things happen, it's not just about how well the house is built, but also how easily and affordably you can repair it.
Right, because who wants to deal with a huge construction project every time something goes wrong?
Exactly. And that's where MHS shines again. With those modular panels and replaceable components, repairs are often much simpler and less expensive compared to a traditional home.
It just makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like that Lego analogy again,
Yeah.
You can swap out a damaged brick instead of having to rebuild a whole section.
Exactly.
And speaking of swapping things out, didn't the document mention something about bullet resistance?
You weren't dreaming. It did. While it's not a standard feature, it points out that it would be relatively easy to integrate bullet-resistant materials into those modular wall panels.
So you're telling me I can have a house that can escape a lava flow, and it's also bulletproof?
It's not out of the realm of possibility.
This is amazing.
Okay.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, but I'm sensing a but coming.
You're right. MHS isn't perfect. No building system is. And it does have some limitations.
Okay, spill the beans. What are we talking about?
Well, stay tuned because in part 3, we're going to dive into some of the challenges and considerations that the document reveals. It's going to get really interesting, so don't go anywhere.
All right, we're back, and I'm ready for the juicy stuff. Those MHS downsides.
Okay, well, hold on. Now, I wouldn't say juicy exactly. But yeah, there are definitely some things to consider if you're thinking about building with MHS.
Fair enough. So lay it on me. What are some of the challenges the document brings up?
So one of the first things they point out is that because MHS construction is so specialized, it can sometimes be hard to find builders and contractors who actually have experience with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's still relatively new compared to traditional methods.
Exactly. So the workforce might not be as readily available in every area.
And I bet that could affect both the cost and the timeline of building an MHS home.
Absolutely. If you have to bring in specialists from out of town, it can definitely add to the expense and potentially delay the construction process.
Okay, so that's something to think about.
Yeah, for sure. Do your research.
What else did the document highlight as a potential drawback?
Well, it also pointed out that while MHS does offer a decent amount of customization
Yeah.
in terms of layout and design, there are still some limitations just because of the nature of the modular system.
So you're saying that while you can personalize your MHS home to a certain extent, you might not have the same level of freedom as you would with a custom-built home designed completely from scratch.
Right. You're working within the constraints of those pre-designed modules, which might not perfectly align with every single architectural vision or unique site requirement.
It's like a trade-off then.
Exactly. You're trading off the efficiency and advantages of modularity for complete design freedom.
That's a good point. It's about finding that balance that works for you.
Absolutely.
And speaking of design, the document also touches on something that I know some people have very strong opinions about.
Let me guess. The industrial look.
Bingo. The exposed aluminum frame.
Yeah, that's definitely a love it or hate it kind of thing. Some people are really drawn to that modern minimalist vibe that the metal creates, while others find it cold or unfinished looking.
I can see that. I think it's a bold look.
Yeah.
That's for sure. It's not for everyone. So if you're dreaming of a cozy traditional style home, MHS might require some creative design solutions to kind of soften or conceal those metal elements.
Yeah. You've got to be thoughtful about it. It's about understanding the aesthetic possibilities and limitations of the system and working with a good designer who can bridge that gap and make it work for you.
It sounds like you really need to find the right design team.
You do.
Yeah.
Someone who understands MHS and your vision.
Okay, so we've talked about workforce limitations, design constraints, and the look of the thing.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Yeah. There's one more important point that the document brings up, and it has to do with sustainability. You know, the environmental impact of aluminum production.
Right, aluminum doesn't exactly have the best reputation when it comes to being eco-friendly.
It's true. The document acknowledges that aluminum production is energy intensive, and it can contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. So for people who are really concerned about the environment, it's definitely a factor to weigh.
It's about weighing the pros and cons, I guess.
Yeah. Are the benefits of MHS worth the potential environmental cost?
Are there any sort of mitigating factors when it comes to aluminum and its environmental impact?
Well, the good news is aluminum is highly recyclable,
Okay.
so it can be used again and again, which reduces the need to keep extracting new materials.
That's good.
Plus, an MHS structure, because it's so durable and long-lasting, could mean that you're demolishing and rebuilding less often compared to a traditional home. So that could potentially offset some of that initial environmental impact over the lifespan of the building.
So there are trade-offs to consider on both sides.
Absolutely. It's a complex equation. There are no easy answers.
Well, I've got to say, this deep dive into modular housing systems has been incredibly eye-opening.
Me too.
We've seen how well they hold up against all these crazy threats,
Uh-huh.
uncovered some surprising benefits, and we've acknowledged that they do have some limitations.
Right.
What are some key takeaways you think our listeners should walk away with?
Well, I think the big one is that MHS offers a really unique approach to building, especially in those areas that are prone to natural disasters.
Oh, sure.
It's strong, adaptable, easy to repair. I think it's a serious contender for anyone who's looking for a safe and durable home.
Yeah.
But like we've discussed, it's not perfect.
Exactly. It all comes down to your individual needs and priorities.
You've got to weigh the specific needs of your region, your budget, your design preferences, all of it.
Right. Do your research, talk to experts,
Exactly.
and explore all the options before you make any decisions.
Well said.
Well, huge thanks to our expert for guiding us through this fascinating deep dive into MHS.
It was my pleasure.
And to our listeners, we hope this has sparked your curiosity and give you lots to think about. As always, we encourage you to keep exploring what other innovations are out there, what advancements are being made in sustainable building materials. There's so much to discover. So until next time, happy exploring, everyone.